Adventurers, we are back. It's Tom and Lotus again, and we are talking about another creation story. Wait a minute, how are there more than one? Well, we've got news for you. There's all sorts of different variations on creation stories. We just covered 2 weeks ago the creation story from the perspective of the elves, and now we're going to give the humans, the Manish races, a shot to get their version out and try to understand the similarities, the differences, why are there two, what's actually going on here. And so that's today's episode. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
And Lotus, thanks for joining back too. Welcome back to the show.
Absolutely.
How's it going?
I was going to say, this is going to be fun. We've got our creation variations coming. So I hope everybody enjoyed the last one. And now we'll be dealing with another group. And there's quite a few ways that people view the creation of this world when everything's discussed from within the world itself. Mm-hmm. Not having that cut and dry omnipotent narrator makes things interesting.
Do you think if we ever realize that like we are a simulation and that there are like some other intelligent forms of life that are controlling the simulation, do you think that we'll feel that like maybe the people in this universe do? Like they're looking at our crazy versions of creation stories and probably humans.
Turns out there was an omnipotent narrator for us this whole time.
But we just don't know, right? Like, so our perspective on this is like their perspective on us. And be like, wow.
That's kind of funny.
So we're going to get to, there's even more crazier versions of this stuff, or at least a little bit more left of common. Let's call it that, because the Elven version of the creation story is pretty common. The Imperial version of the creation story, pretty common. But the other groups, not as common. We'll get to those in the future. They're wild and wacky, and be ready for that. But before we get too wacky, we're going to step on what I generally consider to be the other version of the main events. Right? We talked about that first with the elves and how the elves felt like they were betrayed by Lorkhan, and they're still trying to get back to where they came from. They believe they descended from these godlike beings and that they need to get back there somehow. The Imperials, not so much. They have a different version on this. And in order to get through this, we're going to be reading through another section of the Monomyth. The Monomyth is a document that shows up in the games since Morrowind. It has multiple sections based on different groups and their beliefs. This section is about Cyrodiilic, Shezar's song. Shezar is the Imperial name for Lorkhan.
Right. And the Monomyth in general is going to be the crux of a lot of the cultures within the series, and kind of giving us the basis for them. So, yeah. So here, let's, like we did last time, we're going to read through the text. Then we're going to just see what the text says and interpret what the text is telling us. And like I stated 2 weeks ago, the reason we're doing this is because so many people approach the lore from a perspective of, well, I heard this, or I saw a summary and it said this. But they don't usually go back and actually just read the text and see what the text says in context and what things it might also bring up that gets skipped over all the time. We found some of those on the last episode. So go with this here. This will be fun. So this section starts off, and I'll read it out. Lotus and I will discuss this as we usually do. It starts out with a quote. "This was a new thing that Shezar described to the gods, becoming mothers and fathers, being responsible and making great sacrifices with no guarantee of success. But Shezar spoke beautifully to them and moved them beyond mystery and tears. Thus the Adra gave free birth to the world, the beasts and the beings, making these things from parts of themselves. This free birth was very painful, and afterwards the Adra were no longer young and strong and powerful as they had been from the beginning days." This whole entire thing is quoted, but I don't believe we know who it was quoted from. And it's in some ways considered like a synopsis. It's all kind of boiled down for the Monomyth version of the story, right? Now, Lotus, this seems pretty similar from the beginning to the Elven myth. What do you think? Yeah, there's a lot of similarities. And again, like, it kind of makes sense that a lot of these will have similar, like you said, we're dealing with a little more straightforward. Currently, we're not getting too weird right out the gate.
Right.
But
yeah.
It would make sense that the idea behind formation shares a lot of similarities.
Yes. And so some of the similarities are that the Imperials don't dispute the idea that Shezar convinced them, the other powerful beings, to give of themselves in order to create creation. And how did they do that? Well, they became mothers and fathers. They created something together. They came together. They have offspring. Those offspring become part of reality. And so this kind of implies that the elves aren't wrong, that somehow the beings on this Nirn are there because they descended from the gods. So that's not really that different. It's kind of funny to see that here, right? Because it feels like the kind of thing that you would assume that the Imperials would push back against, be like, well, no, we didn't descend from the gods the way you think we did. But no, they're in agreement in this document.
They're kind of on the same page with this.
Yeah. Also, it's very clearly stated that the Adra, and it uses the word Adra here, meaning our ancestors, which is funny because that's an Elven word, and yet the Imperials are using the word Adra. They're not using the word divines. They're saying Adra, our ancestors. And whether that's just a slip up because they don't really use the definition the same way that the elves do because they understand the breakdown of the word, or maybe they actually genuinely see that. But we'll get to a little bit more of that as we go.
Right. They could also think that they're, connected to some type of divine being. It makes sense. A lot of times when people have sentience, they think that there would be something higher that they're connected to. So it tracks that they might as well.
Right. And it specifically notes here that the Adra were no longer young and strong and powerful as they had been in the beginning of days. And this implies a little bit of an answer to the question of why don't the Adra engage in the world more often the way the Daedric princes try to do. And one of the justifications is that they're old and tired. they already deposited so much of their energy
from all this intervening.
Yeah, they put all their energy into existence, and they've got only so much left. I mean, although it does seem like an infinite amount of power in some regards, and this idea of the planets being their realms, and it's kind of infinite, like a Daedric realm is kind of infinite in their own ways. It still shows that there are limitations, that these beings are not completely infinite from a power standpoint, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Maybe infinite from like an understanding standpoint, but we're kind of moving off the document. So let's continue with it. Right. It says, some Adra were disappointed and bitter in their loss. Notice that it says some. And angry with Shazar and with all creation, for they felt Shazar had lied and tricked them. The trickster god, that perspective, is the same from the Elven perspective.
Right.
So, and they don't deny it. They say that this is just how some of them feel. It goes on and says, these Adra, the gods of the Altmer, so now they're calling them out, the gods of the Altmer. That's other people's gods. This happens in ancient texts all the time where you have different groups, whether it's the Israelites or the Egyptians or the Babylonians. They don't dispute that other people's gods exist. They just aren't their gods. So they put them in their place, and they basically like, we all have dads. Our dad's just more awesome than your dad.
My dad can beat up your dad. Right. That type of deal.
Yeah, and that's where they're coming from. These Adra, the gods of the Altmer, led by Ariel. So they acknowledge Ariel just like the Altmer or the Altmer do, as being a descendant of Anu, basically, were disgusted with their enfeebled slaves and by what they had created. There's some cool stuff in here, right? This is implying that they created the slaves that they are then disgusted by.
Yeah.
Right? Like this diminished version of themselves, their descendants, they feel shame because of how
they made these.
Right. Yeah. Because of how incomplete, how limited, how petty, whatever justification they would use.
Now it just sounds like a really disappointed dad.
Right. Like basically the Imperials are painting the Adra, the Elven gods, as being bad parents.
Right. Like, oh man, I'm disappointed in you. It's like, yeesh.
Yeah. And so we get a quote from them. Everything is spoiled for now and for all time. And the most we can do is teach the Elven races to suffer nobly with dignity and chastise ourselves for our folly and avenge ourselves upon Shazar and his allies. So basically like, suck it up. We made you, but you're just going to have to deal with it. You have to suffer through it because that's just, what mortals are going to have to do. Sorry. But by the way, we're pretty upset with Shazar and his allies, so we need to seek vengeance on them.
I love how this is almost the opposite of ancestor worship, which you see in like Dunmerry culture and stuff. This is just like complete disappointment all around instead of like, yeah, no, you venerate your ancestors. Like, well, no, you just be disappointed in your ancestors.
Right. But this is like the Imperial perspective on how the elves are supposed to deal with their ancestors. And,
right.
And it gets even darker. The next line says, thus are the gods of the elves dark and brooding, and thus are the elves ever dissatisfied with mortality and always proud and stoic despite the harshness of this cruel and indifferent world. What this feels like to me is you should read it backwards. It feels like, hey, we notice that the elves are constantly dissatisfied. They're always proud and stoic, and they complain a lot about their place in existence. So therefore, they must have terrible, bad, dark, brooding gods who did this to them.
Right. It's like, what is bringing you to this place? Oh, it must be your gods.
Right. And so if your gods are so terrible, then our gods must be better.
Right.
Your gods
We're not
suck.
nearly as melodramatic as you guys, so our gods rule.
Right. So there's clearly lines being set here. And the other thing that is worth noticing is that they are calling the Adra the elves' gods. So they're implying that the gods that they worship, even though oftentimes somebody will say, well, Acatosh is descendant of Ariel, is the dragon time god, then he's worshipped by both Imperials and by Altmer, so it's the same being. But I think what they're implying is that, no, you guys have Ariel, we have Acatosh. Those are not the same. Those are different.
Right.
And so they're kind of creating these boundaries, which is part of why there may be more confusion about like, okay, Anu created who, and then who did that thing, the soul of Anu, and then that thing created Ariel, but Ariel and Acatosh are not the same, but they are the same.
Not the same in our situation. It gets a little like, who wants to call dibs on what they're calling dibs on? Like,
right. It also feels like one of those arguments you have with somebody, and they like try to claim something big, and then you go, yeah, but you only really did like this 40%.
Right. It's like you're responsible for this portion of it, not the whole thing. Like,
right.
You're included in it, but let's not just say that you did this.
Right. Like you could, you're taking credit, too much credit. You couldn't have accomplished that if it wasn't for this or for what I did.
Right.
Or for all those other things. Right. And so they're basically like creating this division and basically, okay, that's your stuff. We don't want any of that stuff.
We don't like that stuff. You can have that.
Our version is better, even if they're kind of the same. So
yeah, let's just rename it, and then our version is really cool.
Right. All right. So it goes on. Other Adra looked upon creation and were well pleased. So not all the Adra were upset with Shazar or Lorkhan. These Adra, the gods of men and beast folk. So they're taking claim of not just the gods of men, but these same gods are the gods of the beast folk. So they're like, okay, you elves over there are isolating yourselves. We've got everybody else. Everybody else is our gods.
It's literally an us versus them.
Right.
Like,
and we're going to make our us bigger than yours because we're going to include these other races too.
Yep.
Because they're pretty pissed off at you guys because you like to enslave them and do terrible things.
Yeah, it's one of those like, the enemy of my enemy becomes my friend type of deal. Right. More so than I feel like this is an altruistic thing where it's like, oh yeah, no, we can be accepting to everybody. It's like, no, it's probably just that that they'll probably join you against the Altmer.
Right, or against the Dunmer, or whoever has been abusing them at some point.
Altmer tend to just be the loudest of them, but they're all like Merverse men type of deals. So.
Right, and like I noted before, this is all written by somebody. It's all a quote that somebody is saying, but we don't know who that is. We don't know when it was written. Each of these different pieces of the Monomyth could have been written at very different times by different groups, or originally written by different groups and then consolidated by a single source. There's a lot of ambiguity here. So we don't really know when it was written, which means it could have been written at some point in history when the Empire already existed and already included beast folk as part of the Empire. So it may be a political decision to include them here in order to make them feel more of a cohesive whole, even though they are always treated as minorities. So keep that in mind. So here, let's continue this. It says, these Adra and the gods of men and beast folk, led by Acatosh. So now they're putting their flag in the ground. We've got the time god on our side. Screw your REL. We've got Acatosh. Praised and cherished their wards, the mortal races. Oh, these gods are nice. They love us. They want to take care of us. They like us as opposed to your gods who think you guys are pathetic slaves. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, hey, I mean, what's the best way to try to get people to join you than to like make a common enemy? And it's like, with the slavery thing being so prominent throughout the series, it's a pretty good, it's a pretty good claim to be like, hey, look, they're making you slaves. That's pretty awful, isn't it? It's like, okay, well, yeah, I can't assume many people are going to be down with that. So those not currently doing it, and I do stress currently doing it because, you know, there's always situations that there's a lot of gray area with how people act throughout the series. But it's like when you can point directly at those currently oppressing you as, well, we don't agree with that either, you now have a bond, essentially, which it's like, that's a great way to form alliances, even if they're just kind of temporary or built on a rickety foundation.
Right. So I want to address something else too, because this is a great question, a great comment that I think I can shed some clarity on. In chat, Summit the Dragon says, welcome to chat. Thank you for being here. They call the same being different names or different parts of the being. True, it might be the case. Could it be like the parable of the blind men and the elephant? The parable of the blind man and the elephant is like one guy reaches out and touches the elephant's leg, but he can't see the elephant. And he's like, oh, this is a tree. Another guy touches the tail and he's like, oh, no, it's a rope. And they all have different perspectives of the elephant because they can only see one part of the elephant at a time. Mm-hmm. I'm going to try to address this as quickly as I can. In my, I have a degree in religious studies and history. I've studied a lot of the histories of different myths and religions and those kinds of things. In the time that I have studied these things, we like to view those kinds of religious works as an intent to try to uncover the nature of reality, the nature of God or gods. And oftentimes people will justify different religions or different writers or whoever's perspectives on that as kind of like the analogy of the elephant. Like, Taoists discovered this piece over here, and, Muslims discovered this piece over here, and Christians discovered this piece. And so they're similar, but yet they're all different. They're all trying to describe the same thing. That's fun. That's a fun way of perceiving that. But when you actually go back to the documents that describe the things that they're doing, the people writing those documents were way more motivated by the political landscape and the combating and dealing with their place in the world and justifying their existence way more than they were doing any sort of scholarly pursuit about trying to uncover the truth of reality. There is some of that, but most of the time you can take those documents and you can tell exactly when they were written and the context of the world they were written in by the things that they found more pressing and important to their existence in reality in that moment.
Right.
And so I say all this, let me conclude this real quick.
Finish up.
I say all of this knowing that Michael Kirkbride was the author of this work for, externally, the meta author, not the person in the games. And Michael Kirkbride has studied a lot of these ancient beliefs, and it would make sense that he would craft these documents in a way that they would mirror the way that these documents actually work in our own world. So yes, maybe they're all describing parts of an elephant. More likely, they are all making some sort of political statement about their importance in reality and the nature of where they feel they are currently socially. And I guess, I don't know, nationalistically, because religion and nation are inherently tied together, at least in this world. So
right, and I think that's kind of a good point to make, was the fact that it's like so much of this is written based on their real world counterparts and crafted into this fictional world of Tamriel and on Nirn. Right. And it's why it feels so real and like tangible, even though it's like, fictional worlds can obviously be very well written and stuff like that. And you don't need to necessarily always have that, but having this connection makes it feel like an actual living fantasy world in so many aspects. And it's why the series has been around for so long. And it's stuff like that where it is this kind of nebulous, like, what is the reason behind this being written from an in-game perspective?
Right. You always have to get to why was this written? And most of the time it's because somebody was trying to make some sort of statement and claiming of power and status in the world and those kinds of things. The theological pursuit comes after that usually. And then that means that you have to try to remove those aspects of it. But it all gets mixed in together and it becomes very, very difficult. Yes.
It's definitely one of the things that I feel is such a strength of this series, because accounting for that in the world is so bizarre, because it's like, even when you have kind of grounded series like in fantasy where it's like low fantasy or whatever, or there's political intrigue, oftentimes you do kind of have these accepted religions.
Right. Well, and here's the other thing is that just because I just put together a big argument for why this isn't the parts of the elephant and it's more of a political standpoint. Some people are going to misunderstand me. They're going to say, oh, well, Tom on the Lorecast says that this they aren't looking at different aspects of the same thing. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that it's more likely that like the first intentionality of writing these documents is political, but the second intentionality could still include some metaphysical truths about this world and this reality. The difference is that we can't just take everything everyone says and go, oh, well, that's another piece of the elephant. So now we got to tack it on here. No, that's not how that works. And that's why it's so tricky.
Right. And the other part that's interesting about that is just because something is done with a political slant in the series does not negate its ability to also be
metaphysically
a true statement about the metaphysical realm. Like they don't exclude each other.
They don't exclude each other.
Both totally be true.
Absolutely. And so that's what I'm saying is you have to be careful. You can't assume one or the other every time. But if you are going to assume one thing, it's probably more likely to be the political motivation than the metaphysical accuracy. Let's call it that. So here, let's continue on. So their Imperials are basically bringing together their Adra, the gods of men and beast folk, including Acatosh. And then there's this quote within the document. It says, "We have suffered and are diminished for all time, but the mortal world we have made is glorious." This is Acatosh talking. "Filling our hearts and spirits with hope. Let us teach the mortal races to live well, to cherish beauty and honor, to love one another as we love them. Thus are the gods of men tender and patient, and thus are men and beast folk great in heart for joy or suffering, and ambitious for greater wisdom and a better world." What they're doing here is they're contrasting themselves with the elves. They're like, okay, those elves are a bunch of slaves and they're grumpy and they hate the fact that they exist at all. And their gods are dark, terrible beings. Our gods are loving. Our gods are going to teach us how to live good lives. Our gods are going to be with us in joy and suffering.
Yeah, they bake us cookies on Sunday.
Bake us cookies on Sunday.
It's all about like, here are all the positive aspects to our gods. And it's like, it is funny because of just how ham-fisted it kind of is coming across, where it's like everything they're doing, just look how bad it is and how, oh man, it's miserable, and ours is great and it's sunshines and rainbows.
Wouldn't you want to worship our gods? Don't you want to come live with us in the empire? Because our gods are pretty awesome.
Right, which kind of I feel lends credence to literally what we just went over, where it's just like this seems less of an objective, what can we explain about things and how can we just pull people to our side? Again, not necessarily saying none of this is true, simply the fact that there is definitely the mannish political slant to gain allies
historically
against the Mer.
Historically, in a lot of religious documents from the ancient world, they would state something like this, and then they would follow it up with examples of ways that their gods do things for them. Like, and we worship them for the time that we were able to beat off the armies of so and so, and the beat off sounds terrible in that context.
I resisted.
Beat away.
I didn't say anything.
Clobber the armies of so and so, and the time that they brought wealth and food during the time when the river dried up or whatever, right? They make these bold statements about like, these are examples of why the gods love us. That is missing from this document. That is not included here. Now, it doesn't mean that it would have been included or it should have been included, but it definitely is missing. They haven't given in. It's like in politics today when so many politicians will just say, well, this is what's happening. And then like they'll be on the news and the news reporter will be like, okay, cool. Where's the proof? What's like, so if that's happening, then what's the evidence? And then they just avoid the question.
They avoid the question, or when you have online debates, the response is not to actually provide examples to support your argument, but rather just say, Google it, or I shouldn't need to tell you.
Just keep on. Yeah, I shouldn't need to tell you, or just keep stating more things so that you have it's a Gish Gallop where you just have so many different things so that nobody can ever go back and try to unverify the other things. So anyway, that's what this feels like. We're down to the second to last paragraph here. And it says, now when the Daedra lords heard Shazar, Daedra lords, for the first time we've mentioned Daedric princes, that Daedra lord and prince basically means the same thing.
Pretty interchangeable, I would think.
Yeah. In some cases, Daedra lords means the Daedric lords who are serving under the prince. But in this context.
Yeah, you can have, I would think in the context of this, they're just using a different name for Daedric princes.
Yeah, it's basically the same. So when the Daedric lords heard Shazar, they mocked him. They didn't like Shazar. And the other Adra, they don't like any of the Adra. And there's a quote here, cut parts of ourselves off and lose them forever? That's stupid. You'll be sorry. We are far smarter than you, for we will create a new world out of ourselves, and we will not cut it off and let it mock us. But we will make this world within ourselves forever ours and under our complete control. This is a very simple explanation of the realm of Oblivion and the realms of the Daedric princes in Oblivion and how they tend to be endless and infinite, and the Daedric princes are in 100% control and they maintain that control. Whereas this is also implying that on Nirn, that the Adra don't really control everything.
No, it's more that they made a sandbox that we play in as men and Mer, whereas the Daedric princes made these realms where it's just like they're essentially a puppeteer, and every one of their little minions, it's like, well, no, you do what I say because you're my minion.
Right, but that's not what Shazar or Lorkhan wanted. In both of these versions of the story, he's trying to create something through the input of the Adric power that enables
free will.
Yeah, mortals to have free will and to live in this world. And the Imperials, the humans, tend to be cool with that because they're like, well, we get to exist. That's great. And the elves are like, well, we could have been gods.
Yeah, so like, cool. Sucks. This existence is miserable.
Right. Like, so, yes. So think of it this way. You know how oftentimes when you meet really, and this is they're gonna be like, oh, you're getting on this eat the rich tangent. You've already talked about politics or whatever. But think about growing up. There were times, at least when I was growing up in my school, where I would, and this is not 100% true all the time, but like, the rich kid was whiny and nothing was ever good enough, but like the poor kids were just happy to like hang out and play games.
Yeah, got to enjoy their rock.
Right?
Like one big rock.
Yeah, and I've mentioned this before. Like the girl who turned 16 in one of my classes and came in all upset, and somebody was like, why are you mad? And they're like, oh, my dad got me a BMW. And they're like, what? That's awesome. And she's like, yeah, it's the wrong color. like give me a freaking break. Like, your parents bought you a BMW, it's the wrong color and that's what makes you upset. Okay, cool. That's what to me that's what the elves feel like to me, is like, yeah, but we should have been greater than we are. Okay.
Yeah, pretty much. That's actually I feel that's pretty relatable to that exact situation.
Right. Yeah, the gods gave them crazy magic powers, all sorts of, abundance and the things that they need, but nope, that's not good enough. Yeah. All right, so let's move on to the last paragraph. We've got this is how it ends. So the Daedra lords created the Daedric realms, so basically summarizing what the previous paragraph said, and all the ranks of lesser Daedra, great and small. And for the most part, the Daedra lords were well pleased with the arrangement, for they always had worshippers and servants and playthings close to hand. How do you feel about that, Lotus?
That's great. That's just great. I'm really glad that we just have all that available.
Yeah, it's like, okay, you guys have what you want. That's cool.
Yep.
but like you basically you just control everything they do all the time.
Yeah, it's just like great. You just literally just yeah.
You're just playing with your toys.
What's that?
They're just like playing with their toys.
Yes, that's pretty much it. It's just like the kid who going to the children analogy again. It's like, oh, well, these are my toys. Well, would you have more fun sharing them and being able to play as a group? No, they're mine. I'm going to play with them. They're just me.
Nope. Get out of my realm. Go back to your room.
Yes, get out of my realm.
Toys. So it goes on. It says, but at the same time, they sometimes looked with envy upon the mortal realms. For though mortals were foul and feeble and contemptible, which is generally what the Daedric princes try to tell everybody, their passions and ambitions were also far more surprising and entertaining than the antics of the lesser Daedra. It's weird. You give a bunch of people free will and they do more interesting things.
So, just going to continue with this kid analogy. Now this kid who's sitting over there with all their stuff they don't share, somebody else gets a brand new whatever. Mm-hmm. They get a brand new bike and it's just looking at their toys and it's like, man, I wish I maybe had shared a little before so that I could now interact with that. Because I was so busy coveting what I had. Now I'm envious of what they have.
Right. And notice the Daedric princes are making fun of the Adra. Well, look at you idiots. You all took parts of yourselves and gave to this thing that you created. And it's terrible. I mean, look at all these mortals with their feeble, foul, contemptible, flawed bodies and their limited lifespans and all of this. But they do things that my guys don't do. So
yeah, I guess I'm still interested in that. Kind of fun though.
It might be more fun to play with your toys than my toys.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, well, now maybe I almost want to share. It's like
right. So here, let's wrap up this section because this is how it ends. Thus do the Daedra lords court and seduce certain amusing specimens of the mortal races, especially the passionate and the powerful. It gives the Daedra lords special pleasure to steal away from Shazar and the Adra the greatest and most ambitious mortals. Not only are you fools to mutilate yourselves, this is a quote, gloat the Daedra lords, but you cannot even keep the best pieces, which prefer the glory and power of the Daedra lords to the feeble vulgarity of the mush-minded Adra.
The old mush-minded Adra.
There you go. But basically, like, yeah, you guys suck, and this is how much you suck. Even though you've got, like, shinier toys, your best toys still like us better.
Right, yeah. Like, nerds, my stuff's still cooler. Your stuff's fine. If you want to give it to me, I'll play with it. But, like, I'm not going to ask you to play with it.
Yeah. So you can see how, like, this document is basically creating a sort of creation story, although it didn't go into Anu and Padme and any of those things. It's basically picking up with some of the pieces that you might be familiar with from the elves, which is why we started with the elves. And then they're saying, okay, the elves have their gods. We have our gods. All of them are Adra, but these are the ones that we like because they're the nice ones. But there's also Daedric lords, Daedric princes is more commonly referred. And somehow they're all kind of in the same power category. They're all these powerful spirits that do crazy things. But the Daedra mess with us, so we have to have a justification for why they do that. Okay, well, maybe they like that we have free will. Oh, but free will allows some of us to become very powerful. So that means that they're more tempting for the Daedra to mess with because they're more powerful, which seems to be true. I mean, in every game in the series, you become one of the most powerful, influential individuals in Tamriel. And in every game in the series, you get approached with like Daedric deals and things that can kind of play with manipulating you to do certain things or rewarding you with certain things. So it's accurate. What do you think?
I mean, again, it seems like there is a solid basis to these things. Again, like we said before, just because they have a political slant to them for whatever side is putting this information forth, doesn't mean that it also doesn't have some credence to it really having something to do with how things are created or the structure that they all live in. And it seems with what we experience in game that this very well could, at least in part, be true.
Yeah, so there is some proof. Oblivion, Acatosh shows up. Mm-hmm. I'm sure anybody who's jumping into Oblivion at some point is going to realize this. I won't spoil how and why.
Acatosh is seen.
Acatosh is active in the world. So that even though the Adra tend to be standoffish, sometimes they show up and do stuff. The Daedric lords are clearly trying to mess with reality. They're trying to
on the
invade.
Like that's most of the plots of the games.
Right. They're regularly doing these things all the time, multiple times through history, trying again and again and again to invade or to manipulate people or just to have fun or whatever their justification is, which is usually foggy. So it would make sense that the Imperials would have a good internal sense of what the Daedric princes are more like than what the Adra are like, or especially as you go back further into time or to the beginnings before time, who is who and how all of that stuff works. That's where it starts getting really, really fuzzy. The other thing that I noticed is lacking from this description is what happens to Shazar. The very last mention of Shazar in this document basically like it says here, it says, now when the Daedric lords heard Shazar, they mocked him. And so they start making fun of him. And that's it. Like, there's no other mention of Shazar after that. So it's as if Shazar is still there. And yet the Altmer believe that Lorcan, Shazar, was killed. And his heart was thrown into the ocean and all of that, which there's proof in Morrowind that that's true.
Again, like a lot of times you will get glimpses of this, like, well, this has to have some type of basis in what is real in the series because you interact with parts of it. Mm-hmm. Maybe not everything described around it is exactly as described, but if you find the heart of Lorcan and it has all these mystical powers, something like happened. Probably the heart of Lorcan. That's something important. Right? Something's there. Right. Exactly.
Came from somewhere. Also, what isn't mentioned here is anything else about the Beast Folk other than they're with us. But are they? The Khajiit have their own pantheon. Right. The Argonians have the Hist, which is a completely different thing.
Totally different thing altogether.
Right. So I don't know that they're completely with you guys, even though you kind of.
It's more of just you're universally against the other guys.
Right. Yeah. So this is like leaving holes, right? Also, they're just incorporating everybody. Like, this is the Empire. The Empire is the Mannish, races plus some, depending on the extent of the Empire at whatever point in history. But for the most part, the Imperials are like, they haven't talked about the distinction between them and the Nords. They haven't talked about the distinction between them and Bretons. And especially they haven't talked about the distinction between them and the Red Guard, who came from Yakuta. And Yakutan stories of creation are completely different. They're similar in certain ways. Again, you can say like, oh, well, this is the trunk of the elephant, this is the tail of the elephant. So yes, they kind of can fit together if you kind of squint a little bit, but they're also very different in other distinctly different ways.
Right.
So we're going to have to cover that stuff in the future because that's not what's covered here. So in the future, we're going to cover the Yakutan lore. We're going to cover some of the beast races, which have a little bit less, they're a little bit less fleshed out, but they're still there. And then we're going to cover some of the other documents that kind of try to stitch this stuff together. And so that's coming up in future weeks. And how's that feel, Lotus? Do you feel like this is a satisfactory version of the creation story, or does
I think this is a decent version of the creation story because, to your point, it feels almost like the story just ends for this one, where it's just kind of like
it's not really. It feels less like a story and less like an argument even.
Yeah, actually, that's a good way of putting it. It's a little less of a creation story and a little more of a creation flyer on why you should join our side.
Yeah, and even that they don't do very well because they don't give you like justification. They're just like, well, our gods are better, and
we're way cooler.
They don't give you examples. They don't give any examples.
Right.
They don't even list out their gods in this document.
They use the trust me bro approach.
Right. They're like, well, we got Acatosh. Okay, well, which other gods? Which other do you have Zenithar? Yeah, the elves have him. Like,
yeah.
Is he the same Zenithar?
Right. Do you have your own Zenithar?
Right. Like Julianos, right? Oh yeah, the elves like him too.
Yeah. It's like, oh no, for sure. It's an interesting twist on just like, and the way it's done, which is one of the things I like, it feels like it's written by a different group. Mm-hmm. Like it doesn't feel like this is kind of getting out of series for a second. The way it's done is it doesn't feel like, okay, and now we need to write for this side. It literally is, I think, very well written the way this, I really like the Monomyth because it's like, it feels like a different author is writing each of these for whatever reason, rather than the same author trying to write to sound like different perspectives, if that makes sense.
And also, and part of that is the choice of words. It doesn't use Lorcan, it uses Shazar, which makes sense. If you're coming from a certain culture, you're going to use the name that culture uses. But they also do this thing where, and I think this is one of the genius things about Kirkbride, and you see this in historical, religious, and mythology works, is that depending on who wrote it at what time, other minor names and words change. So calling them Daedric lords feels antiquated compared to Daedric princes. It feels like a different name for the same thing, but not so much in the sense of, well, the Imperials call them this and the Altmer call them this. More in a sense of like, well, that used to be the old way that they were referred to. We just don't use that as much anymore. It's
the same way vernacular falls out of favor in our real world. Like, there's new slang and old slang, and then like you get enough generations removed and people are like, what does that mean? Like this,
right.
What does that saying have anything to do with anything? It very much feels like that.
Yeah, and Kirkbride does this a lot. Different documents that he writes use different verbiage, and does it way more when it comes to things like the tribunal in Vivek and those analogies that he's using and that stuff. But even then, it's sophisticated and more poetic and of a different feeling. You get a completely different vibe, even though it's the same author. So it's very cool because that does track with like the history of everything.
That, and like one of the things that, some people like to bring up is, I've always said that I think Kirkbride, when run through a bit of a filter, is like fantastic. I think it made some of the most creative stuff. And I feel like this is almost like the embodiment of that, where it's sort of run through enough of an editor where it becomes cohesive and has this flow to it that makes it feel real. It's just my only time when it's like, not that it's bad, but it's way less for me, is when he's just like completely allowed to go on his own. And it's just kind of like, I feel like,
I don't even understand this sentence.
You can see how a lot of his weird stuff from like Coda or whatever, when it gets, a bit more distilled down, you get these types of things. And when it's just left to its own devices, you can see it much more in its primal state when you get to stuff like Coda or whatever, or some of his forum stuff.
Right, where it's hard to get through an entire sentence and feel like you understand exactly what you're trying to say.
Sure.
Yeah, it gets crazy. But there you go. That's the creation according to the Imperials. We'll get to other stuff in future episodes. But don't go anywhere, because we've got to go thank our patrons. And we have a random UESP page is coming up. So we'll be right back in just a minute.
Oh, what are you doing? I'll tell you what you're doing. You're listening to the Elder Scrolls Lorecast.
I hit the wrong button. Let's try that again.
You're listening to the Elder Scrolls Lorecast, dear child of cities. That is why the Night Mother loves you.
All right, here we are. We've got our new patrons to shout out. We've got Malachite, August B, Adam T, Sukshi, SXSHY. I don't know how to pronounce that, but it's a cool looking name. Patrick G and Nick. Thank you for joining us. Patreon.com/Elder Scrolls Lorecast for where you can sign up and get ad-free episodes, t-shirts, and stickers. You can join us for patron chats, lots of different things, different tiers. And all of you help keep the show going. So Lotus and I really do appreciate you for that. Also, I have to shout out our Daedric Princes. You guys get shout outs every week. We've got Blinding Vision, Hersine, Kira C, Mothman, and Peter R. Thank you for your continued support. Also, if you'd like to help out in other ways, you can leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. You can share the show with other people. You can call and leave a voicemail at voiceline.app/Elder Scrolls. If you'd like to get your little comments, and try to keep it under about 2 minutes if possible, and we'll respond to your comments or questions. We don't have any new ones this week, but you leave us a little message. Voiceline.app.
Or if you've got any question, we've had some that have sparked a little debate, so those are always fun. If you got something creative you want to throw at us,
absolutely. So voiceline.app/Elder Scrolls is the place to do that. So there you go. That's all that stuff. Are you ready for our random page?
Let's random it up.
This one is from Elder Scrolls Online, which is appropriate because on PC we've got the new update that came out recently.
Yeah, dropped 2 days ago.
Yeah, so
2 days ago. Something like that.
I've been playing Elden Ring Night Rain, and so I need to go back into ESO and like.
I'll be curious to hear what you think
stuff.
about the subclassing.
Yeah, so I have some ideas about what I might want to do with my character, but I haven't actually dug into it yet. So
I've heard outside end game, like end game rating type of thing, people really, really like it. It doesn't land quite the same for those people from what I've heard, because it just kind of really makes one build the build.
That was my speculation, right? Remember
Yes.
when we were talking about this, and I was like, the raiders are going to put together like 2 or 3 meta builds, and then everyone has to do that.
But I heard outside of doing that, people have been, a lot of people have sent me how much fun they're having with it, because they're like, oh, I can do this and this, and this is wild and blah, 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 and this works. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. That's what I like to hear. I think the majority of players sound like they're enjoying it, because as we know, being a hyper end game raider is a pretty small portion of the community.
That's true. Yeah. I'm going to give my Nightblade laser beams. That's going to be my plan.
Good.
Laser beams.
Beams, I heard, are the new cool kid material going on right now.
Oh, it totally makes sense. Like as soon as they announced this, that was the first thing I thought was like, you're going to give laser beams to every class.
The best that I've heard, and I've heard it's really kind of like one of the major go-tos, is the Arcanist beam until you get to the thing almost being dead, and then you go to Templar beam for execute.
There you go.
So you just change your beam from one beam to another beam. It's beams everywhere.
It totally it hits whatever's in front of you. You're good to go.
Elder Beams Online.
Elder Beams Online. All right, so I hit the random button with Elder Scrolls Online people. This one's very short. Some of these are just super short, right? Corventina Falto. Home City.
Nothing. Who is that?
Yeah, Home City, Brass Fortress, location Clockwork Basilica, race Imperial, gender female, health 15,000, reaction friendly. Corventina.
Because it's an Imperial, that's convenient.
Yeah. I genuinely, this is what I do. I hit the random button. This is what we get. This was not planned.
Sometimes it makes sense. Sometimes
right? Like if ever you're like, hey, you guys plant these, go listen to other episodes. They don't always make sense.
Yeah, no, some of the ones we really can't work with.
And some of them are like lines of code.
Yes, there was one that was a literal like line of code for a mod, and I'm like, what do we even do with this?
Yeah. Okay, so Corventina Falto is an Imperial apostle and a member of the Congress of Calibration who attends the congressional meeting called by Divith Fear during the related quest. The related quest is The Strangeness of Set. Investigate Sothasil's recent change of character. This is part of the Clockwork City stuff. And she looks cool. I mean, she's got like one of those clockwork gowns with like the metal arms that look
I actually think I remember this character now because of the context of the stuff that they're related to.
Yeah, she's sitting on like one of those, like, I think there's like an auditorium type room with like these different levels. She's sitting on there with some other people. So there you go. She's one of the random characters in ESO in Clockwork City. So that's it.
That's certainly random.
That's pretty random. All right, Lotus, what else do you have going on before we head out?
Not too much. We just had an episode of Tales that came out this week and kind of just covered a little more of PAX East. I answered some questions that people sent in, so I was happy to be able to do that for people. Then my game time is really just like when I get game time, it's Oblivion. So much Oblivion. Yeah. I don't have the update 46 on PlayStation yet. We still have a week and a half before we get it, so I've kind of just been waiting a bit because I'm interested in getting into the multi-classing or subclassing. So in the meantime, I've really been enjoying Oblivion, and if you're interested in Oblivion stories and stuff like that, that's really... News was slim, so it was basically 2 hours of us just regaling each other with what we've been doing in game on Tales. It was just kind of like story time for 2 hours this last episode, which was fun. Even though it is shocking to people how little I've accomplished in Oblivion when I'm about to hit level 30.
Because you just walk from place to place. You don't even.
I sure do, and I just got to. Oh God, what's the temple? I'm spacing on the name all of a sudden. You have to bring Martin there.
Cloud
Ruler Temple.
Ruler. I was gonna say Cloud Lifter, but that's like that's a thing enough. You put on your microphone to make it not buzz.
So at level like 29 and 7 ace, we just got him there. And people are like, what are you doing?
What are you even doing with your game? I'm just chasing foxes around the wilderness.
Yeah, pretty much.
Nice. Well, I'm glad you're still enjoying it. And yeah, I'm going to dive into ESO at some point.
I'll be curious to see what you think.
Yeah, I've updated. I downloaded the update. I just haven't launched it yet. So maybe I'll do that tonight. But yeah, that's what's going on with Lotus. Of course, my stuff. We've had a number of new people join the Rocket Club, the Robots Radio Rocket Club, because they want to launch new podcasts and things like that. So I've been working with a number of new shows on the network, all sorts of cool stuff to check out. This is partly me saying, go to robotsradio.net and check out all the shows if you're looking for other shows. But it's also me saying, if you want to start a podcast and you want to be part of a network, a bunch of shows that are like this, that's what we do. So go check it out, robotsradio.net. There's info about how you can join and how I can help mentor you with starting your own show and all of that stuff. So that stuff's been going great. Lots of people with some new cool content. Outside of that, I'm going to be at GCX 2025 in just a few weeks, July 25th and 26th. It's in Orlando. I'm not sure if I'll be there both days or if I'll just drive over for one day and just not get a hotel room because it's enough of a drive that I can make the drive, but I'm not going to want to go back and forth. But
sure.
I don't know. But we'll see. But that's coming up. So this is going to be fun because there are voice actors. There's going to be a bunch of Elder Scrolls stuff. There's going to be an Oblivion Gate, a life-sized Oblivion Gate at the event.
There's a lot of cool stuff in that our little charity Discord thing with everybody that we've been talking about from Fallout from Hope. Shout out to Ken for doing all of this. Yeah. And, it sounds exciting. I wish I could make another trip to this, but this one I'm going to be glad to hear from you reporting on this one because I am not going to be able to make this trip down to Florida, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry. Well, I guess I'll just have to have fun without you then.
Yeah, you'll just have to have fun and then, tell us all about it.
Yeah, so if you are considering doing this, it's Orlando, Florida, July 25th and 26th. It's not that expensive. It also, you can also get a pass that includes going to... it's not Disney. It's the other one. It's not, why can't I think of it? The theme park with the movies. Universal Studios. There we go.
I did it.
That's it.
I win.
I was thinking the other one that's also Universal. I think it's Universal Studios.
I have no idea. I haven't been to any of those in so long.
Yeah. So anyway, there's going to be that stuff. My thing is I'm going to be there. Who knows if I think I'll probably be recording. I might be streaming, might be recording live. I don't know all the details. I might be able to get some interviews with different voice actors. There are voice actors who have done work for Elder Scrolls and for Fallout. There's a whole bunch of information I'm not going to go into again, but if you want to find out more, I got to interview Professor Broman, who is behind the creation of GCX. It's been around now for a number of years, and we had a conversation on the Fallout Lorecast in the most recent episode that is going up this week. So go check that out. More information there, but we also make a really good argument for why the next Fallout game needs to be in Florida because it would be ridiculous. Not just because of Florida Man, but that's part of it. But I'm mostly interested in going, meeting a bunch of people and that kind of thing. And we will be putting together I'll probably create a channel on the Discord for anybody who's going so we can have hey, we're having a meetup at this restaurant for lunch or whatever. So if you want to be part of that and, just kind of turn it into a trip for your summer vacation, there's lots of stuff to do in Orlando. So that could be part of something bigger. But yeah, if you're curious, check it out. GCXevent.com, I believe, is the website. But that's it. That's what we got going on. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And so glad that you are still here and a part of the show. And Lotus and I will see you next time. Until then, stay safe out there. And, if you have to convince somebody else that your god's going to beat up their god, then I guess that's just what everyone does all the time anyway. So go. Yeah, pretty much. So we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to the Elder Scrolls Lorecast. Check out robotsradio.net for more podcasts just like this, and join us on the Robots Radio Discord. Be part of a community of over 5,000 people who are excited about video games and so much more. Robots Radio. Games, lore, stories, community. Just press play.